brain gains, what makes a region truly attractive to migrants today. Our first panel dealt with retention or bringing people back. This is about attraction and what makes a real difference. We'll look at the balancing act behind the strategies, and the classics are there: jobs, housing, infrastructure, but what are the other elements that perhaps are a little bit less tangible? I'm going to hand over to Katrine Ebbesen, who's Communication Manager of Premium EU, as you all know, who will lead the panel discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jen, for that introduction. And just getting situated. Yes. And as Jennifer mentioned, now we're moving a little bit on from before lunch, where we spoke about demographic decline with a focus on how to keep people from moving away, how to retain people who are already living and improve quality of life. Jordi then mentioned shops, public service, housing as the most important factors. Pavel mentioned factors that are harder to measure: social resilience, sense of optimism, and countering loneliness. We're going to shift the perspective a bit, but I think we're going to see some of the same themes. And we're going to talk about the competition for newcomers and how regions get newcomers interested in the first place. Because attraction campaigns are sort of the new normal. As Hannah also mentioned, this was a big trend 5 years ago, at least in Denmark. So these attraction campaigns are not new. We see beautiful posters and articles saying, come for the nature, come for the fiber optic high-speed internet. Maybe that one's a bit old. Or come for the tax incentives. I'd like to ask the audience, maybe a show of hands, who has seen an attraction campaign, maybe in their city or a rural area. Quite a few, yes. These are not new, but they can be quite creative to look at. But does the marketing reflect reality, and which strategies actually work? Why do some migrants only stay temporarily? These are some of the things we're going to talk about today. But I am going to first let the panelists introduce themselves, tell us about themselves, but also answer briefly the first question: what makes a region truly attractive? And I think we're going to start with Tuba.
Okay. You know, that's a very, very difficult question, although we've been talking since hours. I would like to say what is not attractive, because I think the regional attraction is really about lifestyle branding. We talk about, let's say, nature, internet, or whatever, but it is neither lifestyle branding nor an individual decision. I think we have to start with setting the context for us, because it is relational. It depends on your family situation, it depends on the socio-political context that you're in, and it also depends on, in general, so your needs, I mean, because it does change a lot. And me, I'm Tuba. I'm a professor at Free University of Brussels. I'm a migrant, long-time migrant. I've lived in 6 countries, I think, in Europe. My kids are not migrants. They were born and raised in Belgium, but they are called migrants. I think we're going to talk about it later, but I do work a lot on how to make life more accessible and equitable for everybody through new technology and the things. And I think we have to talk about, when we talk about the region's attractiveness towards migrants, I think attractiveness is for everybody, because we are all human. So it's not particular for migrants or the others, and I will try to give some examples later. But again, I think we have to start the discussion with how relational it is. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tuba. And then we're going to go to you, Radim. You already introduced yourself a little bit, but remind us again, and then tell us, what makes a region truly attractive.
Okay. So I had just 3 minutes, I think, in the beginning, so I did not have time. Someone asked me if I'm a mayor. Yes, I am a mayor already for 16 years. But maybe you derived it from the fact that my mother was a mayor, my grandfather was a mayor. So, yes, and at the same time, until December, I was for 4 years Deputy Minister of Regional Development of the Czech Republic, trying to implement from the ground to the national level, and also to the European level. And I'm a member of the European Committee of the Regions. Actually, I'm focusing on the MFF and 2028 plus, which from the point of view of rural development as a rapporteur of the opinion on the future of rural development 2028 plus. And as I mentioned already, I am also teaching as a hobby at the University of Economics in Prague, diplomas in European studies. So I try to interconnect all the levels of the European governance, but of course the local level is the basic one. So I always say that first of all I'm the proud rural citizen, and it's not that I'm a bloody politician, because always I think that all the people, NGOs, think that the politicians are the biggest evils. I am playing trombone, you know, I am in a ski club, so I'm competing also with veterans, unfortunately. So I am a part of the society, and I'm a part of the municipality. I am not just a politician who is on the other side. And I think this is very important to make the regions attractive, you know, to be one of others, you know. Actually, in the Czech Republic, we have a beer culture, so you have to go as a mayor to the pub to discuss, because it's a folk parliament, as in Denmark, so you have to communicate with people. And I think to make the most attractive place, I always love the Japanese proverb that the most beautiful place is the place where you live, you know, and that's what I am using, and I think some recipes I will tell later, because there is a first question coming to that, so I won't tell the secrets in the moment. So I think all the places are attractive, and I think Europe is beautiful because it's a unity in diversity, and it's so there are so many varieties, so you know, I think all the places are attractive.
Thank you very much, Radim. That was an inspiring start for sure. Kaire, will you tell us a bit about yourself and, what makes a region attractive?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Well, I have to start with a confession that in the beginning of the day, when it was asked that who has moved from rural area to the urban area, then that's me. And I come actually from a village originally that now has 27 people. It's 80 kilometers from Estonian capital. And I think my story is quite usual, actually. I went to live in the capital area to go to high school, then I moved to the second largest town, Tartu, for the university, and then I moved back to Tallinn for work. And now I have ended up in Estonian Ministry of Regional Affairs and Agriculture. So what our government has done is that a couple of years ago it decided to bring the regional policy under the Ministry of Agriculture. So we are now implementing in our team rural development policy, regional development policy, urban development policy. It's all like in one team, and it's actually quite an interesting exercise. And it's definitely has given like a wider perspectives, like what are the different factors contributing to attractiveness? Is it the rural areas, urban areas? And from what was already discussed today, and what I've learned, that actually there's multiple factors, and each of the areas has its own strengths, and it has its own characteristics that make this region attractive, but not for everybody. Like, we all have our different preferences. So there's not a simple formula that you can make your region attractive for everyone. Like, you have to choose, or you're more likely to be successful with certain types of people. So, but to sum up the question, like what makes the region attractive, I think it's a combination of different characteristics, and but I think it also comes to a very personal level, and this already was mentioned, like to the family level as well. It's a sense of belonging. What we see in Estonia is that people often move to the area where they have lived before. Like, they move back to most likely to the region where they were born. But it's also a sense of security. It comes to income, it comes to services, but it also has the support system, like the family or the community around you. So yeah, it's a multiple factors, so it's not an easy recipe.
Thank you very much, Kaire. And then I will ask Sandra, if you can introduce yourself and tell us what makes a region truly attractive.
Thank you. So my name is Sandra Jolk. I'm a policy analyst at the OECD in the Center for Entrepreneurship Cities, Entrepreneurship SMEs, regions and cities. I'm what I guess we call a high-skilled migrant in Europe. I grew up in Germany. I studied in the Netherlands, and now I'm at the OECD living and working in France for 12 years. So I also moved from an urban city, Paris, to a little village outside of Paris a year ago. So I'm a champion of rural policy as well, and rural livelihood. And I very much appreciate the social cohesion in my little village and all the help and support I get there. Other than that, I work on regional development and demographic change, and in particular on how regions can respond to challenges such as population aging, youth outmigration, and the need to attract and retain talent. I coordinate currently a project that is called Helping Regions Adapt to Demographic Change. It forms Pillar 2 of the Talent Booster Mechanism of the European Commission. And as part of this project, we are doing 10 in-depth regional case studies on how regions can develop strategies to attract talent and retain people. I would say overall, probably the ingredients for success are not so much different for attracting people than for retaining people. So creating economic opportunity, of course, is part of the story, but I would say it's a necessary but perhaps not sufficient condition. You also need, adapt public services, you need housing, you need good childcare, you need the ability to provide good healthcare facilities, especially in a society where people get older and older. You also need flexible government arrangements, I think, within a region, because what we see in our work is that within a lot of regions are very heterogeneous, so there are places that grow and places that shrink. Some municipalities do very well, others do less, so also to be able to keep that in mind and work with that is very important, using, for example, intermunicipal cooperation. And then lastly, just to take up the point that was made by our colleague on bars. I also learned how important bars are for regional attractiveness when I worked on a study in Castilla and León in Spain, where we heard that there are even a lot of regional subsidies to keep bars open and alive in very small municipalities, because there is such an important point of contact to fight social isolation and to keep people talking to each other in the municipality. So I'd be curious to hear what from the Spanish colleagues, but also from other countries, what you think about that.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Then we move on to Claudius. Can you tell us about yourself and what makes a region attractive?
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to start also to thank all of you for being here. This is really great. And I mean, the project was funded by the European Commission, and we really did a lot of effort to collect all this data, and we really are very motivated to kind of translate this to policy making. And yeah, I want to encourage all of you to just reach out if it's about the dashboard or beyond the dashboard. If you want to have more information or like a conversation or cooperation, really, please do so. Yeah, my name is Claudius Ströhle. I'm an anthropologist interested in migration, inequality, and social change. And I'm currently working at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Austria, and was in charge of doing the Austrian migration case studies. So I interviewed people in left-behind regions in Austria and asked them how they experienced arriving in these areas. I interviewed experts and policymakers. I did a policy lab on kind of the interlinkage of attraction and retention, and that's what I want to focus on today. And to your question, what makes a region really attractive, I think we talked a lot about belonging and identity, and I think identity, it's important that it's always both. It's like, how do I see myself, but also how do others see me? So this is always interlinked, and if we kind of translate this to rural areas, I think an attractive region is where you as an individual can strive, but also where the region itself has kind of self-confidence, also what Radim says, and I think this is important. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Claudius. And I agree. Let's keep the conversation going beyond this panel and furthermore. So there's quite a few urban to rural movers here on the panel, which is very, very good for the credibility of our question itself, which means that something is working. I want to start by asking, we're going to first look a little bit more about strategies, attraction strategies themselves, and then we'll probably move into a little bit of a general discussion about integration and what it really takes to keep people. But Sandra, I want to start by asking you, at the OECD, you just mentioned that you worked with the talent development traps, and the regions at risk of falling into these talent development traps. What exactly is that trap, the problem here? And how can regions, how can attraction and retention strategies help regions break out of it?
Very good. So yes, the talent development trap, as it's also described in the European Commission strategy on harnessing talent, is about very simply said, regions that are losing their working age population without compensating for enough people with the right skills in the region. So it's quite a toxic mix of youth out-migration, rapidly aging population, and low levels of educational attainment in general. And it affects about 30% of the EU population. And there are regions that are fully in the trap, but also regions that are at risk of the trap, where we see that these regions, they have these rapidly aging populations, they have these issues of youth out-migration, but at the same time, they're still quite dynamic. There's still a lot going on, so we don't talk about, just managing adaptation, but really about also making sure that there is perhaps a way out of that trap. And we call it a trap because it's self-reinforcing. So if you have fewer skilled people, that means you have less companies, less investors, which means you have slower innovation, which then in turn means you have fewer high-skilled jobs in the region. And to give you an example of that, for example, to cite again the region of Castilla and Leon, it's very well known for its universities, its great education system, but at the same time they have an issue of retaining talent because they don't have the jobs in the region to match that talent, so they face huge issues of attracting people or even of retaining people. At the same time, this trap is also often an institutional crisis. If I can give you the example of Campania, another region we've worked with in Italy, there is a huge loss of the public workforce in the sense that over the last decade, the region lost 36% of its public workforce per 1,000 inhabitants. So that means there is a loss of institutional knowledge and memory, and there is also an issue if youth leave, that the social fabric is eroding, that you have less civic participation, less networks, and so on. At the same time, there are ways, I think, that we show in our work how we can overcome that trap. There's obviously no silver bullets, and you work on a few axes at the same time. But I want to make 3 points. The first is about skills. You need to work on the demand and the supply of skills. What we highlight in our reports is the need to strengthen vocational education and training. And we've seen that, for example, in a study in Banská Bystrica in the Slovak Republic. They were piloting how to align vocational education better with the local labor market. But it's also about creating quality jobs. And here, often also cohesion money can come in to fund, for example, startup hubs where people could go and really work in high-skilled jobs. At the same time, as I said before, attraction is not just about jobs. So you need to make sure that you have the childcare facilities in place, that you have good healthcare facilities, that you also have connectivity. So especially since COVID, with the teleworking, a lot is about that as well. And then the last point I want to make is that we've also seen no region is like the other. So I really want to highlight the importance of place-based strategies and that there is no one-size-fits-all regions approach. And of course, that is very theoretical, but a good example we found in the work is the Italy's national strategy for inner areas that really tries to look at cross-sectional investments in very small municipalities across the country to support investments in health, mobility, services that also break silos across these areas that tend to be looked at quite separately. And I'll leave it there for now.
Yes. Thank you very much. Really interesting points. And now I want to kind of take it over to you, Kaire, because you both mentioned there's obviously no one-size-fits-all, and there are, these gaps to fill. But Kaire, I know as well, when we had our talk, you told me how Estonia combines regional and agricultural policies on a kind of bigger scale. Does this method make sense when designing attraction strategies, especially when we look at how place-based they should be?
So, yeah, as I mentioned, we have a ministry who's responsible for both for regional development and agriculture, and I think we're still learning about both of the sides. And I think what's what came quicker was this discussions about what is the distinction between rural policy and regional policy, because they have had a bit different angles and maybe different approach also at the EU level, but now they were like all in one place. So what is the distinction? It has never been that clear in Estonia because most of Estonia actually is rural. And we proudly say that we have cities and towns, and well, actually most of them are really small. So it's not a clear line, and so we have been working on that. And what it has led us to do is to go more towards this territorial approaches, where we look at the urban centers, which are the small towns, and then the rural areas as like a one common area. And this urban-rural linkages as a buzzword, it's been going around, but now we have been forced to dig deeper and really discuss about what it really means. So how can the urban centers develop and also bring positive impacts to the rural areas around, and what are the developments happening in the rural areas that can also benefit the towns around them. So we have quite a few of these policies or policy tools to kind of look at the entire area, both the rural areas and then the centers. For example, we have the county development plans, and we have the new spatial plan in the making, which also focuses on this multicentric development model for Estonia, because I think the main regional imbalance in Estonia is between the capital region and then the rest of the Estonia. So it's not directly between urban and rural. But if you ask what is the combination of regional and agricultural policy, then I think one thing to think about is this agri-food sector. I think it's maybe one of the sectors where this rural areas or more remote areas have like this natural competitive advantage compared to the urban areas, and it's usually not the case. So if you think about this food sector and also other national resources, then this is something that the regional development can grow around and can build around. So kind of use it as a center point for the economic development of the entire region, and then also like part of the attraction policy of the region. Because, another idea on this is also maybe to think about that actually Estonians, we also have the out-migration from the rural areas, but I think from the sentimental point of view, Estonians kind of value the idea of rural life. Like, they like the idea that their neighbors are not close by, they like the idea of privacy, having your own house, living in the countryside, living like among the nature. And much of these attractions that the rural areas have, they somehow link back to the agricultural history or agricultural background, the landscape, the settlement structures, some of the architecture. So I think when we talk about the attractiveness of especially the rural areas, there is actually, I think, more linkages to agriculture than we maybe think of daily. Yeah.
And maybe a short follow-up, because you know, for those who aren't an expert in agri-food, myself included, is it flexible enough? Is agriculture flexible enough to compensate when there is this out-migration and when there are these gaps? Do you think? Does that make sense? No? Okay.
No, can you...
Or in the sense, you said agriculture is a great resource. Maybe it's also very Estonia, you know, based.
Yeah, it is a great resource, but we have to look at it like wider. It's not going to be probably the major employer in the area, but it's something to build the value chains around. Like when you have to look at it like in a wider concept, not only like food production, but you can like build on it and develop it further to make it like a bit wider, and then also have the wider impact for the regional development.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for that. What all of you have mentioned is this relational aspect, you know, and the sense of belonging. And I think something that's interesting is then, well, can policy really add something to that? Is it in the end not really policy, but relationality? Is it the fact that you have memories in a place to begin with that makes you want to go somewhere? Or, yeah. So I want to ask you, Radim. You're a highly educated, internationally experienced policy specialist. You moved away as a young person yourself to Denmark, I believe. Can you tell us about your decision to return to your rural home region, which I think you said 150 kilometers? 250 kilometers from the capital. What made the difference? Was it policy? And can that be replicated?
I think good stories can be replicated, you know. So maybe just to reply what you asked, my colleague, what I love about Estonia is there is no city, you know, we were joking. But they have a concept of the restaurants, the farm, you know, it's in the capitals, and they bring local products from the rural areas, they prepare it in the traditional way, you know, and that's something I really love about Estonia. I love Estonia at all, but this is a really very good concept, you know, so I think those linkages are working much more than maybe at the other cities. So to come back, first of all, I would like to stress out that it's about education, of course, you know, because it's interesting that not just me coming back from Brussels, you know, having a job here, but also my brother, you know, who is a very successful businessman, you know, who studied business in Prague. He also came back, you know, to the region. So we have the same mother, of course, you know. So it means that that you know, the motivation, how you educate the kids, you know, when they are small, and also the educational system, you know. So what we do in my municipality, we are having participatory budgeting, even at the primary school, you know. Now they want skate park, so I don't know what we will do, you know. And they want shop with Messi, you know, and like this. But we do this participation. I go to school very often to talk to kids, you know. There are 15 of them who want to be mayors, you know, now in the primary school. So that's good base, you know. And you should work with them to give them, to listen to them, you know. And that's something which is very important. So education, you know, and feeling of belonging, you know, to some place. You know, we are a very strange part of the Czech Republic because we are in Sudetenland, so it means that 70% of people changed after the Second World War, you know, in my region. So there are no traditions. But even though we were able to build a community of successful people coming back in my generation, we have very popular band, O5, which is one of the most popular Czech pop bands, you know. And all the guys, 5 guys, they are my friends, they are living in the area, they are still, some of them working in their civil professions, you know. We have a very successful coach of alpine skiing, actually also my friend, who is the coach of Ströhle, who is winning ski alpine skiing and snowboard at the same time. And he's also living in the area. And there are many of those like that, you know. So we try to bring this community and to tell the stories that even successful people can live, you know, in the community. But on the other hand, you know, we are not idiots, you know. If there was not the quality of life, if there were not good schools, we would not live there, of course, because we need for our kids to have the best. But we have the good quality schools. So it's necessary to invest into infrastructure, because what I try to follow and try to all the time repeat, I like the idea of South Korea about the quality standards of life, you know, that every person has the right to have the same quality standards, not affordable housing, but good quality housing, you know. So this is some kind of basic standards of infrastructure should be defined, I guess, on the European level. And it's not about cost efficiency. I hate all the time speaking about competitiveness, you know. The biggest competitive advantage of Europe is the quality of life, you know. I would never live in New York, in American rural areas. I would never live in China, of course. So, of course, we cannot compete with them, you know. And believe me, I spent, because for the 4 years when I was a deputy minister, I was responsible for sustainable development, so I always spent 15 days in New York in July, and went also to rural areas, and I would never, you know, it's like crazy for Europeans to see how the life is there. So, you know, it's about the quality of life. And it's also about well-being, because I love the study of OECD about the well-being, you know, because at the end of the day, it's about the happiness of people. So we at the ministry, we always said, how much money, €1 for how much units of happiness we will invest, because at the end of the day, people in Austria, 70% of people are more happy in rural areas than the average, you know. So it means that even Vienna wants to be the most sustainable, best city, you know. The people are more happy in rural areas, you know. You see also in the Kitzbühel region, for example, I have a lot of friends there, you know, because they want to live next to the footballer from Munich, you know, and et cetera, to successful people. So it's something which is about this storytelling and the quality of life. And of course, then this can lead to the change of mindset, you know, that someone says, okay, you know, it's not the end of the world, you know, if I come back, you know, for the price of a small little flat in Prague, I have a house in the rural area, you know, so I have better life, you know, I have good quality schools, hospital is 10 minutes, you know, I can go for skiing in 20 minutes, you know, so it's for the family, it's in fact better. Of course, the husband or the wife has to sacrifice himself and go to Prague, you know, for 2 days days a week, and then they can work from the home. So I think this is something which is very important, and I'm very much believing into changing this mindset. What I really hate, and this is the only study I don't like from OECD, is the smart shrinking. And the American smart shrinking idea, it's like a patient being, in the hospital and dying, and giving him something, So I think, and in US they said, oh, it's not cost effective to have broadband in rural areas, it's enough for them to have, mobile, etc. So I think we need to invest. And what was already said here, place-based approach. It's something which is said all the time, but I think for the future of the program, of the next programming period, how we are discussing it, it will be much more important. And I think also these dashboards and all the data you are now producing will be needed to be used much more. So to finalize it, as I always hear that the community is the substitute to quality of life. That's not, community is just the value added. It's not the substitute of quality of life in the rural areas.
Thank you very much, Radim. There's some shots fired here at OECD. And some praise, of course.
But Enrique knows it.
I'll pass it on to Enrique.
That could be a whole other panel. No, I want to. So what we've heard now, I mean, it's beautiful statement. It's quality of life. It's all these things that we can definitely say. In a perfect world, if we had unlimited budgets and we could invest in both schools and business and new infrastructure and all these things, then wouldn't that be great? That's why I want to take it over to you, Claudius, and ask a little bit about the competition between young and new, young newcomers wanting to be attracted versus old and settled, keeping them happy, and the competition between attraction and retention strategies a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the biggest mismatches from your experiences with working with, or having done these policy labs with decision makers who are really struggling and have maybe can maybe invest in one or two, either attraction or retention policies? What's your experience?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, firstly, maybe it kills the mood, but I think I have to say that from research, we know that migration policies have very limited effect. And I think this is important to keep in mind. There was a colleague from Berlin, Manuela Boyachiev. She looked at the guest worker migration that linked a lot of South and Eastern European countries to Central and Western ones. And what she found out was that policymakers at that time envisioned migration like a water tap, that you can just switch on and switch off as you want. But history showed that that's not true. And just recently, Matthias Czajka, a colleague from Krems, showed this with a lot of data, that migration policies, might it be restrictive or more liberal visa requirements, often just can be seen 10 years later, and also then just limited. So I think in terms of this attraction or migration policies, it's firstly important to see they have limited effect. The second thing is to ask the question, who is designing actually migration policies, who is implementing them? And in our case study in Austria, we compared two regions that are very similar in terms of depopulating, in terms of economically stagnating. But there was one difference. One was had a fragmented industry, and the other one had big industry companies. And what we found out was that the region with big companies, they could still attract migrants. Why? Because it's not the state or the federal state that actually designs migration policies. It's rather big industry companies. They kind of invest money into recruitment. And here is the mismatch, I think, also between attraction and retention, because these companies obviously have economic factors kind of as a priority. So people come, but they don't kind of focus too much on the social and cultural aspects, and then people leave after a period of time. And that was also the topic of the policy lab we were doing. So I would kind of think that it's important to look to the perspectives of migrants, of newcomers that actually arrive in these rural areas. And I think there has to be interactive tool of pre- and onboarding measurements. Firstly, like pre-boarding, that there is like landing pages, that there is like a lot of information on how to come to this place, how to find housing, and so on. But then also accompanying people face-to-face when they arrive in a rural area, kind of to help them with bureaucracy, help them to find a house, that they can also kind of build up this like social networks. And I think this interactive approach is important.
Thank you very much, Claudius. And a good self-reflection that migration policies certainly have a limited effect, and maybe even more so. I mean, it's no secret to anyone in the room that we have quite a bit of an anti-migrant sentiment politically throughout all of Europe and in most of our countries. And this is where Tuba, as the expert, you get a bit of a difficult question. We obviously have a lot of data as researchers. We have a lot of policies collected, a lot of forecasting, projections, and all of that. But is the problem with political will rather than really knowledge gaps? Sorry,
it's not fair to get this question. So,
but I know how much of an expert you are.
Yeah, okay. No, thanks a lot for the nice words. But I think better data can definitely help us developing very smart policies. But I think the challenge is not about having a policy recommendation or drafting a nice policy. The challenge is really implementing it and making it sustainable. Because when we are talking about this, I mean, the political will is also about the rise of right-wing going everywhere and the dilemma between what people want, what the policymakers or the politicians think what the people want. So I think we have a lot of data, as has been said today, but the quality of data is a different issue, because when we talk about a lot of data, I think most of the time, I mean, Eurostat is one of the best sources in the world. Like, we have a lot, even on migration, but we have better data on people who arrive. We don't know what's going on before their arrival in the sending countries, and the data, like temporality and granularity, gets worse and worse when we talk about rural areas and smaller regions. So if you're going to have national level policies, I think we can have a better insight. But the local policies, when we talk about local policies and the implementation of that, I think data, the quality of data or the evidence that we use for the policy making can be really questionable, not the political will or the passion of the researchers or the policymakers. However, I think we have to remember something about data, especially with the new trend of big data, the forecasting models and everything. Big data is not always better data. That's the first thing. Secondly, big data becomes small data when we talk about particular groups, when we talk about intersectionality, when we talk about very specific migrant communities or rural areas. And thirdly, data is great to detect or to diagnose a pattern. But the quantitative methods, I'm a statistician myself, but rarely, I don't know if you have any economists around, rarely talks about why. So for the reasons to understand the mechanisms, how it works, why they fail, how they can get better, we really need also qualitative data and qualitative insights. So if you talk about better data, I think we really need a more complementary and more comprehensive perspective on that. So yes, they can really help to design smarter and better policies, but the implementation is also about what we mean by efficiency. I will take you back to Italy-Libya deal. If the policy efficiency is measured by the number of arrivals in the next year, Italy-Libya deal was very, very successful. But if you check the numbers, arrivals in Spain, you will see that the efficiency was very geography specific. I think it is also about how we measure the effectiveness of the policies. And I will give just 3 examples and I will wrap up. So, especially, I mean, and Katrine asked me also to talk about the countries which were not part of the premium. Is that so? There are several countries where they had this attractiveness policies. Like in Ireland, for instance, they did have this: we will give you the digital infrastructure. We want digital nomads. So they really wanted people to move out of Dublin to the other areas to say, so you can work from home in nature. So they really tried, and the name is particularly called Our Rural Future. And there is no evaluation so far about the initiative, but it worked. And there were incentives for professionals to move out. And then similarly, like it could be about this digital infrastructure, or it could be in the depopulated areas in Spain. So there were settlement incentives, like in Soria province, Tyrol province. So these are the more the policy aspects and the let's say, they wanted to see. But if you want to learn more about the reality on the ground, I think you can catch Iris. She's sitting there. Her PhD is all about how these countries try to build sustainable communities, especially with international migration to the rural areas. But I will wrap up with Belgium. Do we have anyone who lives in Belgium here in Brussels? Okay, a few. I mean, when I was walking also, a few of my colleagues asked, oh, when this construction will end. We are in Brussels. Brussels has 1,025,000 people living night time, so that's the residents. But the daytime is estimated between 25 to 50% more of that. Only from Flanders, the Flemish-speaking region, almost 300,000 people work in Brussels, but they do live in so-called rural areas or suburban areas. So when we talk about data, we mostly rely on residents, but in geographically scaled cases like Belgium, it might be a totally different story. I do live in a rural part next to Leuven, where you have 14,000 people only, and it has been getting a lot of international migrants. In the last 10 years, the income per capita increased more than 50%. But this is not a rural development. It is because this area is becoming more highly populated by privileged immigrants who are earning way more than the residents in most of the cases. And there are different things. And my final point will be, I think when we talk about the migration to rural areas, geography matters. When you talk about Germany, when you talk about a Finnish or Swedish island, when you talk about Belgium, it's a different story. Because in Belgium, we don't have a problem of migration from urban to rural, because people do live in rural. We have a saying, especially in the Flemish region, that you are born, you live, and you die under the same tower of the church. So people do live in rural areas, but rural means 10 kilometers from Brussels. I live next to a farm, but it is still very commutable everywhere, and and in most of the cases, living in rural can be privileged as well. So that's where I would like to talk about the context. And going back to data, better data, yes, we definitely need, but we need to, let's say, expand our definition of data. And secondly, comparability and harmonization is a big issue still everywhere, even within a country. So I think we have to be cautious, but we have to leverage what is on the table.
Thank you very much, Tuba, also for those great examples. I want to open up the floor a little bit and see if there are any questions for any of the panelists. Yes, we have one down there.
Yes, me again. I have a question that comes back a bit to the previous research presentation about the distinction between, forced migrants, or maybe we might call them refugees, and then economic migrants. And I think when we talk about making a region attractive, do we want to make it attractive to economic migrants then for the benefit of the region? And I would like to hear from the panelists if they think it would be more useful or dangerous for states, local governments to explicitly define what is economic migration, and to make maybe distinct policy based on this, like policy for refugee migration and policy for economic migration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any panelist takers? I think Sandra?
Yes, I can share a few thoughts. We haven't really looked into forced migration in the work we've done, but what we've seen is that I think creating economic opportunities for migrants sometimes can also turn forced migration into economic opportunities, in the sense, for example, in some of the regions we looked at, for example, in Spain, there have been lots of programs also to attract migrants from Latin America or from Cuba or from Spanish-speaking countries, basically to work as nurses, for example, and they had special training programs. So I get a lot of forced migration could also tap into that as a potential, and I would say that probably the fact of speaking the same language, and we've seen that also working in Portugal, where we heard the same from migrants from Brazil, is already quite helpful in that regard. But again, maybe some of the other panelists have looked at it more in detail.
Maybe I can just briefly compliment. Thank you. That's a great question, and I think in the case study that we did, and we worked with regional development agencies, they are just looking at like non-refugees, but rather on like highly skilled migrants or labor migrants. So I think there is this like voluntarily decision to kind of, look at the specific kind of type of migrant, I would say. But there was like a lot of also refugees in these areas, and the experience was that a lot of them left after a couple of years, because there is this kind of, you distribute people in different areas, but after like 2, 3, 4 years, a lot of them moved out and went to bigger cities. But I think if you want to create an arrival infrastructure or like an attractiveness for newcomers, I think you have to have some specific integration policies or migration policies, but then you also have like you have to have overall social policies. We named it as well, like education, childcare, and so on, that would also like kind of bring these people maybe and want to make them stay.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions in the audience? Conrad? Yeah.
I can just add on generally these categories, forced and economic migrants, are very fluid, and we have to be aware of it. That although in our kind of case, we named and we sort of created a very sort of rigid definition. This was for the sake of carrying out this quantitative part of the research, but generally these are extremely fluid categories, not only when analyzing migrants from Ukraine who have been coming to Poland and other countries of the European Union over the last decades, but when we are analyzing other flows of migrants. So I don't think it's a good idea to think in terms of types of migrants and attracting them to specific regions. I think we should think generally how to make migrants interested to come to this especially vulnerable regions that are sort of desperate for regeneration, for other purposes, for people to be there. And we know also that the places which are attracting both all kinds of migrants are those who are economically most viable. But I wouldn't. I think it's not a right sort of path to think in terms of categories. I think we should think generally about how to attract new residents with different sort of migration features. Thanks.
Thank you, Conrad. Are there any other questions for now? No? Then I would like to ask Kaire a question, because something that we found interesting for a lot of the policies that we found, we managed to dive into quite a few of them, and many of them, of the attraction policies, have a green transition element, either in terms of green energy, companies looking for skilled workers, or it's also about the sense of belonging and having a region that also focuses and values sustainability. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how important the green transition is in effective attraction policies?
I think in Estonian context, I think in general it's probably not one of the top attractions so far, at least for the Estonians. But one of the good examples that I can bring from Estonia is actually related to implementing the Just Transition Fund in Estonia. It was focused on the northeast Estonia, which was the oil shale sector in Estonia. And it was a place-based policy by the locals, by the different ministries involved. And there one of the key points that when we started the process was about creating new job opportunities, new career opportunities for the youth of the region. Because so far the best career opportunity in the area was in the oil shale sectors. Like all of the other sectors were like underdeveloped, and also the wage gap between the sectors was quite huge. So in that case, it was really obvious that if we want to keep the young people in the regions, because it already had been one of the regions with the highest outmigration, we have to create new opportunities for them, to see them in the region. And then again, many of these new curriculums in the universities, development of new businesses, much of it was linked to the sustainability. It was either a circular economy, it was the green energy, and so it was necessary in this context, and it really worked that way. So that's one of the good examples where it did work, but I would say it's not a mainstream thing in Estonia. And another example that to bring out is there's a recent dissertation in Estonia by Andres Reigas, and he was actually studying the marketing strategies of rural communities and focusing on this new intentional communities where people move to this community in the rural area based on their common values. And there, it can be about heritage, but it can also be about sustainability or self-sufficiency. So we see this movement, it's a niche movement, but we see this movement of new communities forming around this kind of idea of sustainability in the rural areas. So in that case, again, it can be part of the attraction of that community, so I think it has its niches. But from Estonian point of view, it's definitely not one of the main attractions so far, but well, we'll see what will happen in the future. So.
Yes, lots of movement on the green transition front on these old kind of the same in Sweden where I'm currently living up north. So, yeah, very interesting. I want to move a little bit. It's slightly related. Claudius, you went in and talked to policymakers in a very traditional industrial region in Austria, Styria, and these regions, whether they be focused on energy or steel production or something, are very male-dominated. It's a very male-dominated sector. Can you talk a little bit about something that that's been mentioned several times today? Is the harder to measure components of belonging in all these things, and something that you mentioned before, at least in our events, is the role of gender. Can you tell us a little bit what, in terms of how that matters as well for attracting migrants long enough to keep them, basically, beyond attraction?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as I said, this region has still big companies and industry. They can attract migrants. But before I will come to the gender aspect, which is very important, I think there is two major challenges for rural areas in terms of these soft factors like integration, participation, engagement, however you want to call it. And the first one is one of the participants of the policy lab said there is no smell of migration experience in our air. And what he meant is cities that they are kind of experienced to integrate, to welcome migrants. They have an arrival infrastructure, they have housing and so on, but rural areas, rental housing is often scarce, and this is one of the big challenges, I think. And this is even more difficult because usually ethnic communities or migrant communities, they can help newcomers, as a first pathway, kind of, to find a job, to find housing, especially if there is a lot of discrimination against migrants as well. And also this you don't have in rural areas. So if you talk about this soft measurements, also integration or participation in rural areas, I think we have to keep these challenges in mind. But what the benefits are, or the potential, is that you have face-to-face interaction, and a lot of the interviewees told me that it's actually an ideal place for migrants because the children go to school, they can learn the language easier, there's not so many kind of other communities, so there is also this kind of potential that rural areas have. And the last point is this gender dimension, because it was especially difficult for female migrants to adopt or to kind of integrate in this area. 90% of the, let's say, green cards in this area in the last year was in the technology sector, and this was very male-dominated. But in the policy lab, one of the participants also said, the decision to go somewhere is often economic, but the decision to stay is then more social. And he said that mostly the decisions, if you stay or not, is made within the family, and often also from the partners of the migrants that came, And so this is an important thing, I think, that there is not so much targeted policies for like female partners or also partners in total for them to find a job, to like childcare policies and so on.
Thank you very much, Claudius. And Sandra, I want to ask you as well if you can expand on this a little bit, because how can we expect regions to adapt, service delivery and skill systems while at the same time also having these quality of life policies that also matter, not just to retention but to attraction, especially of, looking at a whole family perspective and a migrant's lifetime?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I have to answer Radim's point on the OECD study and to thank for the flowers. But just to make the point that, even in the work, this work is about helping regions prepare for demographic change. There's also an OECD work stream that focuses really on how regions that are shrinking can manage and adapt that shrinking smartly. But I want to take up this point that even there, we talk about quality of life, in the end, decline does not mean a decline in quality of life. Like, if demographic change is happening, the exact point we want to make is that it does not mean there is a decline in the quality of life if it's well managed. And an important point to do that, I think, and this is what we show across all the studies that we do, is that the key is not necessarily, when we talk about service delivery, to preserve structures, but to improve the access and the quality of the structures. And this takes also up the point that was made earlier this morning of bringing public services sometimes closer to the citizen instead of having the citizen go for the services. And there are lots of ways how that can be done. When we think about telemedicine, about digital public services, for example, of having also what we call multi-service hubs that we see more and more emerging across a lot of countries in the European Union, in different regions, that combine different types of schools with community centers, so that consolidate services in areas that are losing population, but at the same time improving perhaps the quality of life because of that consolidation. And also to invest strategically in mobility, so on-demand transport for rural and mountainous regions is, for example, something that is piloted a lot across many European regions. The second important point is to talk about skills and talent. I talked earlier about the importance of VET alignment, so to strengthen vocational education, also to provide perhaps incentives for professionals to come back. So many regions that we've studied have also implemented programs that provide incentives, for example, for graduates to come back to a region, or they pay even tuition fees if people stay for like 5 years in the region or 3 years in the region. And that seems to work quite well, and also to offer more lifelong learning opportunities, given that people get elder as well and often age healthy as well. So that is really important. And then the last point I want to make is also the importance of governance and finance, to think about intermunicipal cooperation arrangements, for example, for very small municipalities, how they can be improved. And there we see a lot of room for improvement at the OECD, and also to think about better use of evidence based planning. We talk a lot about data, all the information that is out there, but what we've seen across the studies is that very often the issue is not necessarily the fact that the data is there. Also, people know how to use the data, but to use the data for decision making and to integrate the data into strategies is a totally different issue that is often not yet done.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for those really good points. And time is really running short. We're coming to the end. So I just want to conclude in saying we started with a simple question: what makes a region truly attractive? It's not simple by any means, and I think I will sum up 3 points that I think we can continue the discussion with in the break. Radim, you mentioned that quality of life is the biggest European advantage, and I think that's certainly something that we can continue to talk about. In which ways and how do we measure quality of life, and to who? Then there is this balancing act of attraction versus integration. being, that integration is the true challenge when it comes to finding ways that migrants can truly belong and not just feel interested or sparked, by coming to a certain place for a job. This, of course, also requires balancing the soft and the hard, the social services with hard investments in education and businesses. And finally, what Tuba said, that policy ideas attraction policies are abundant. We see that. We can see thousands of them in the dashboard. But implementation and learning from their impact makes it truly sustainable. And that is the biggest challenge as well. And that is where we hope that our dashboard becomes a platform where regions can also learn from other regions, because that is also evidence. It's also evidence to look at to ask regions and learn from regions' experiences as well. So thank you very much to the panelists and to the audience. And we will now have a short 30-minute break. Stretch your legs a little bit, and then please make your way back in half an hour. Thank you very much.